Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Silent Fire podcast. If you're tuning in for the first time, Silent Fire is a podcast all about encountering the heart of God, coming to know God in our daily lives, but also looking at all of that through the lens of the early church, the writings
Yeah,
of the
for
Desert
sure.
Fathers, and the wisdom that was found in that time. So we're pleased to be here today. Actually, well, we're not really here we're here with
Yeah,
digitally
digitally here,
a special
yes.
guest who
I
is
think they call that piping in.
piping in. We're
It's
piping in a guest. This is the first time we've done this in a recorded sense, but we are piping in a good friend of Josh and a new friend of mine, Steve Schroeder, who is the head
yes,
head
yeah.
of the CMA, the Christian Ministry Association.
Christian Ministers Association.
Ministers
Yeah,
Association.
yeah.
So as we get into this, we just want to encourage you, whenever you're watching it, to like, subscribe, share it. The audio will be put up on Apple Podcasts and Google
All
Podcasts.
that
So you may
stuff.
be listening to us and not seeing us, but we encourage you that if you like the work we're doing, if you like this episode, send it along,
Yeah,
let us
absolutely.
know, and indeed on the video, at least comment below, and we're always keen to engage with you and to talk with you and answer your questions.
Yeah, our goal is to have conversations with people across every expression of, the kingdom of God, and just say, how do we come to know the heart of God, life in God, all these kind of things. And so we're having those conversations. We're having people come in and have those conversations. And today we're just so pleased. I'm so pleased. I mean, I know you're
I'm
pleased,
pleased too.
but you're kind of pleased on behalf of me
I
being
am. Yeah,
pleased.
I can see how pleased you
Yes,
are.
I'm pleased to bring in one of my closest, dearest friends, a man named Steve Schroeder, and who, as Colin said, he's the president, the head. Is that the technical term? Is the president of CMA? CMA is it's a credentialing organization for ministers, but really it's a relational network for walking together and learning to walk together. And Steve oversees a number of leaders across Canada. And there's so much of Steve's life and what has happened in his life that's been of such an impact to me, that I had talked with Colin about this and just thought, let's bring Steve on. And specifically where we want to go in our conversation with Steve today, is we want to talk about some of the principles of the spiritual life that the Lord has given to Steve. There's three principles today. We're going to hone in on one of those, and hopefully we'll do some more episodes covering other principles. But I'll just let Steve talk a little bit about himself. He's just come back from a wedding, so he's quarantining. We have him stuck in his house, and that's the benefit that we get.
Right. We get to interview him.
Is he's turned into a little bit of a monastic for for a couple weeks.
Absolutely.
And so we're just going to talk about what that looks like, living a spiritual life. And so I'm gonna turn it over to Steve. Steve, welcome to Silent Fire.
Wonderful. Thank you for inviting me, guys. It's been a pleasure just watching some of the prior podcasts that you've done. It's wonderful. So it's great. When you said you were piping me in, I was waiting for the bagpipes to actually do some kind of traditional Atlantic Canada welcome. But so I'm thoroughly disappointed in you guys.
Tucked away,
They're tucked away. Okay. Now, well, we'll remember that next time.
I mean, we could, talk about that or screaming cats, one of the two.
Roughly the same.
So I'm not much of one to talk about myself. I love talking about others. People often ask me about our denomination of leaders and ministers across Canada. We're the Christian Ministers Association is a Dominion charter from back in the 40s. It started in the late 20s. And it's been an association and friendship gathering of leaders of like-minded heart that have experienced or encountered the Father and the Holy Spirit in a dramatic way that has shifted them from paradigms and cultures that they've been brought up in church life that didn't necessarily reflect their heart experience and relationship with the Father. So they gathered around together, which is like many denominations in Canada. They had their inception and their birthing. And so we've been navigating that for quite a number of years, and it's a real joy. We have a small cultural statement that we have within our association, and it simply says this: "Hoist your sail, not a flag." And what we mean by that is that we don't ask our leaders to wave the flag of CMA or even make it evident that they are members of CMA, but actually that they hoist the sail of the ministry call and gift that they have, or their church, or their function, and with a sail up high, they can catch when the wind of the Holy Spirit comes or the breath of the Father comes and moves them. It actually moves them forward in ministry and life, rather than just a flag flopping in the wind. And
Right.
we say flags don't take you anywhere. The wind does. And so it's our joy to come alongside leaders. And from my perspective, it's simply said this way: how do we help you hoist your sail just a little bit higher so that you can get out a little bit farther into the call of God for your life? And so when people ask me, we haven't heard of CMA, we say, have you heard of Josh? Have you heard of Andrew? Have you heard of some of the others in our group? And they go, oh yeah. And we go, well, then that's our joy and our pride. It's much like Paul the apostle saying, you are our letter of introduction. We don't need to bring our credentials or who we are or our accomplishments to prove to you that we have a gift and a call. Our signature are the lives of the ministers that we walk with, and the exploits that they do as evidence and fruit of the ministry that we hope to carry well and navigate well. And it's just a huge delight. And so my relationship with Josh Josh and Aaron over the years has just been remarkable and life-giving for us as well. And as a result of a friendship that I have with Andrew Bryce in Prince Edward Island, Josh heading out to Prince Edward Island a few years ago. Is it 2 years now or 3 years?
Dude, it's almost 3 years. Yeah.
3 years November here, right?
And, 3 years, technically December, because that's when we.
Yeah. Was absolutely comforting to me, because he was coming into, moving into a relational atmosphere of a friend of mine, and so it's been great. So I don't know if that tells you a little bit about what we do or who we are, but it's a bit of a nutshell. So.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. I just love. I could sing Steve's.
You have.
Yeah, I have. I really have. Yeah, he's been so impactful to me. Steve, one of the, just talking about there's so many different ways we could go in, especially with what you've said, just how much CMA and how you lead. That's just you're not leading from a place of forcefulness, but leading from a place of saying, how do I see other people succeed? And I know one of the main, there's those three main principles that you live your life by. And I'm just going to throw the three of them out there, and we're going to hone in on one. Don't believe the lie, don't get offended, and it's not about you. And those have become life goals in my life for sure. And I know other people have been impacted by that as well. And so just in terms of the past year, the past just 2020 and the tumultuousness of 2020 and your relationship with leaders across Canada, how important has that first principle been? Don't believe the lie.
It's been absolutely powerful in how I understand and perceive the season that we're in, and helping others, what I would call, realign their heart to truth. Whatever season we encounter, whatever circumstance we encounter, if we take COVID, for instance, this particular year in 2020, there's nothing greater than the dichotomy or the war between, as some would call it, heaven and hell, or Satan and God. And we think it's a war, but it's really not. That there's a paradigm of thinking and understanding that the Father wants to solidify and reassure our hearts where our hearts fail us. And the reason our hearts fail us with whatever we face is the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy our rest, our peace, our confidence, our trust, our stability, and our foundation in who we really are and who really God is. Not even so much the nature of our circumstance or how we respond to it, but the nature of the kingdom of heaven and, of course, the rule of God in the earth. He wants to undermine that. So I use a term that has been important for me whenever my heart fails me. And the scriptures tell us some very wonderful things about the nature of our Father in heaven, is that even when we are faithless, he remains faithful still. Even when our hearts fail us, he is the strength of our heart, and he's the one that comes along to us and fortifies us where we're weak. And the amazing part of that is the recognition of the weakness we carry. And it's very evident even with COVID, where we are trying to understand the nature of what's taking place. And so rather than coming from a settled place of truth, we listen to all the voices that are out there. So I simply say it this way, Father, realign my heart to truth. I see things with my eyes, and the scripture tells, don't judge what you see or what you hear with your eye or your ear, but judge inwardly and truthfully based on the heart of the Father. And so realigning my heart when it gets out of balance, when my heart is, and I'm realizing this because a number of years ago, I'll just preface it this way. And I'm a man of stories, so I tell stories. I was at it. We had
tell the story.
Yeah, we had a national conference, and I had a really renowned theologian sharing for us that year. And we were sitting at the lunch table, and he leaned over to me and he said, and he's an extremely seasoned man that I highly respect and appreciate, but he is a man. And he leaned over to me and he says, Steve, I need to remind myself to be grateful, because I'm not always a very thankful man. And I just was taken back, like, wow, this is like you. And he said, and then he had a barb on his hook that I didn't realize was there. And he leaned in and he said, what do you have to remind yourself of? And I went, oh, you got me. Yeah. And so I developed things, little short handles and statements for me that I need to remind myself daily in order to realign my heart to truth. And the first one was, don't believe the lie. And I realized that a lie cannot exist unless there is a truth that already exists, that the lie is trying to tear down, expose, take away. So the enemy, it says, is the father of lies. He comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And so the lie comes to attack truth that is self-existent and is already there and in place. Mm-hmm. And so for me, if we looked at COVID, and the lie would be, we're not going to be okay. We're not going to have enough money. Everything's falling apart. Church will never be the same again. And I've learned about the lie that the lie never sounds like it could ever come from the Father. Mm-hmm. The Father is always reassuring and affirming. He reminds me of my identity. He reminds me of truth through of his nature, who he is, that impossible isn't a word that he struggles with. And that he has his divine nature and his eternal power oversee and rule in everything. Those are his two great attributes. And so the lie would say, oh, you're not going to be okay. You're not going to have enough money. And I realize, oh, So, well, what's the opposite of that?
Hmm.
I am going to be okay. He's the source of my supply. And so what it does is when I recognize the lie, I always look at the opposite of that and go, so if I understand the truth that the lie is coming to attack, steal, kill, and destroy, I can realign my heart to the truth. And it's a simple little practice. So we were at our daughter's wedding, and the brother of the groom got up to give his speech to the family. And when he sat down, he was sitting next to me, and he said, "Oh, I didn't do very good. That just wasn't the way I wanted it to be." And I said to him, "Oh, don't believe the lie." I said, "You did really well." And then I began to share with him how I realigned my heart, that I used to say, "Oh, how did that go? And, did it turn out okay? I didn't say it the way I wanted to." And I realized the enemy was coming after me to tear me down, have me cower, have me feel inadequate in just being who I am, and the ease of that and the comfort of that. And I said to him, "The truth is you did really well." He goes, "Really?" And I go, "Yeah." And so I began to share with him my principle, don't believe the lie. And it was like a light of revelation came on with him. And he's part of my family. And that it just something lifted off of him where he goes, I said, anytime you feel inadequate or put down or less or hurt, ask yourself, where does that come from? And if I'm hearing a lie or aware of a lie that isn't, and this is what is a lie? Romans 15 says that, that may the God of hope fill you with joy and peace in believing that through the power of the Holy Spirit, you would abound in hope. So we've learned this way through reading the scriptures and getting to know the heart of the Father, that a lie is a statement that has no hope in it. And so wherever there's no hope, there's no possibility of joy. And you realize the lie comes to tear that down. So I said to him, "Oh no, you did really good." And he says, "Oh, I wanted to say this." And I said, "No, here was hope. You could say that next time, or you can still say that, but go over to him and say that." Right. And right away, his heart lifted, and it broke the chain of the lie that, "Oh, you screwed that up." Because the lie, there's no redemptive side or option when a lie is present. Redemption is hopeful and hope-filled. It's future-looking. And the lie comes to pull that away. So anywhere my heart is compromised and the Father's heart for me is compromised, where I'm focusing on me, and that leads into some of the other principles, the other two principles that I have, that I walk in. But the first one is probably the most strategic, is don't believe the lie, because I realize I am one in union with the Father, and the enemy, Satan, will come with thoughts into my mind to undermine that and steal that and kill that and destroy that and make me less, and view myself as less than the Father views me. And it's probably one of the biggest things.
Steve, what I'm thinking also, Colin, and maybe you can weigh in on this too, and just in thinking about what Steve said, and that the fight, we were talking about this earlier, right? In terms of spiritual warfare and the fight. Yeah. And I love how Steve's articulated as the fight. It's really practical. Yeah. Really, right? It's not just we're throwing spears at some heavenly principality or whatever like that, right? And it reminds me of a number of stories in the Desert Fathers in particular, where the Desert Fathers talk about this inner wrestle. Like whenever they talk about spiritual warfare in the Desert Fathers, they're talking about the inner wrestle with, or when they talk about struggling with demons, right? And things like that. I've had people ask me questions that have read some of my writings or read other things on the Desert Fathers, and they've gone, "These guys went into the desert to struggle with demons and fight with demons. Does that mean I need to go into the desert and fight demons?" I said, "Well, no. What they were really talking about was the inner battle of lust, the inner battle of greed, the inner battle of of pride. There's one I'm just thinking of. I think it was Sarah who described. I'm pretty sure it was Sarah who described a 13-year battle with a demon of lust that would come to her, and the fight was, I'm trusting God for my deliverance.
Mhm.
And that was what she stood on for 13 years.
Mhm.
She'd had she'd described as this demon of lust coming to her. And she said, all I would say, because it would come and it'd say, why fight against me, fight against me. And she would say, I'm just trusting Jesus to release me from this and to free me from this.
Yeah.
And so her fight wasn't against the thing. Like Steve, I love how you said that the fight's not so much against the lie. The lie just says, my fight is to find what's the perspective of God in
Yes.
this, and how is he coming to me, and how is his heart impacting me? You know, and I just see those principles in the Desert Fathers
Mhm.
for sure. I don't know what you're thinking about.
Well,
that.
I was thinking about, Steve used one of the words that jumped out to me right there was he talked about the heart being compromised, and it reminded me of, I think it might have been Dustin talked about it, or one of the patristics of early church fathers reiterated by a kind of, mentor community, right? Sometimes talking about some of the most deceptive things in the world, and we have the tendency to always think that if it comes from our heart, it must be good.
Yeah.
And so often it's our heart and what's within that's kind of feeding us the lie, or at least I think, as Steve said, being compromised in such a way that there's sort of a hole in the defense that the enemy gets into to perpetuate a particular lie. But I wonder, what I'd say to Steve, or what I'd ask is, I think, I know from my own life, and I know from pastoring others, that oftentimes there's certain lies, that we have a tendency to perpetually believe, right? Like there's some lies I know that I'll never kind of believe, but there's just certain things that come to me and I'm like, no, that's baloney, right?
Sure.
But there's certain things that it's always the lie I'm going to struggle with, or it's always the lie that Josh or Steve is going to struggle with. And I wonder about, maybe Steve can speak to this, or Josh, or the Desert Fathers, but why is it that we seem to be sometimes so given to one particular thing, or why is the heart so wounded in a particular way that that's the lie that the enemy seems to kind of hone in on and say, no, this is how I'm going to try and get you, right? Whereas other things are not really, my struggle or your struggle or whatever. And how do we kind of go about, certainly in the moment, I think, as Steve was saying, we can pray and we can ask for help, and we can say, nope, this is a lie, and begin to kind of defend against it. But there's also, it seems to me like there's a kind of healing of the heart that needs to happen, so that kind of hole in the wall begins to be kind of boarded up and reinforced. That's what came to me.
Yeah. So how do you find, Steve, how do you find that process playing out? That I have your heart being compromised by a chink in the armor. It's like Smog and
exactly.
In The Hobbit. And so how do you go about, what's the process? Right? Practically speaking.
Well, I think that that's a great observation, Colin. And it's worthy of more reflection. Is there one specific area that you struggle with more than any other area? I think there's a realm of truth in that. If I look at myself, there's a statement that someone made. I can't quite remember the name of the person, but he said this: you're often most positioned to help the people you once were. And so wherever the intersection of the heart of the Father has encountered you, and the revelation of awareness and healing and coming to life was birthed in you, that's probably signifying two things. One, the area of pain or weakness that you actually believed the lie and agreed with the lie of the enemy. And that's an interesting part of that too, because the lie will come, and some, as you said, Colin, some we can just knock off, but it's the ones we actually agree with, like listen to, believe, and agree with. And then we realize that there's not even a chink in the armor, but there's a place in our heart that we've exchanged the truth for the lie. And as is in Lord of the Rings, Frodo gets stuck with the Nazgul blade. Whenever the Nazgul are around, even though it's healed, he feels it. and I think that that is probably true with most people in the area of their weakness, that the Father has actually brought healing and revelation of his presence and power to you in that area of your life. And I'll just quickly explain mine. But also that from that place, the enemy knows that you've actually conquered that, but wants you to remind you of their presence. And, I stuck you once. And when the enemy comes around with the lie, the lies are repeatedly attacking us, is to keep us from ministering and flowing from our weakness to help heal others in that same area. So for me, one of the things that I battled with was, would I ever be a number one? Do I ever qualify? Do I ever have the goods? Do I ever have the approval or the acceptance of those around me? And so I realized that the Father has healed me by revealing his presence and his power and his favor in areas that I don't qualify in, but he has qualified me, and he continually comes and allows me to walk in realms that are that the lie tells me I don't qualify for. So now, given the leadership, I realize when he took me into the leadership of the CMA, I realize you are positioning me in such a place so that I can help others who I once was, that felt unqualified or didn't make the cut or didn't struggled with comparisons with others. And I realized that the Father placed me there because not that I healed my heart or brought strength, but that he actually healed my heart. And I need to agree with that, and then help and then recognize that others will come into my sphere of influence that struggle with that same element or that same lie. And so when I look at what we do with the ministers in our group, we don't have a criteria that many groups have of, certain education or standards or systems or structures. We have, is there an evidence of a call?
That's why they let me in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I saw. So, but what we do is we come alongside and we go, as Paul said in the scriptures, we try to be biblically correct and accurate, that it's not about our papers. It's about the presence of the Father in our lives, and is it the evidence and the fruit of that, and how that flows out, so that we're not at the table anymore, holding out our deck of cards, 5 cards that say, well, I've got an MDiv, and I've got this, and I've got that, and this is what I've written 3 books, and this is what qualifies me. But what qualifies me is my heart is secure with the Father, and he's my source, and I'm among like-minded ones that will help remind me of my identity and who I am in Christ. So, I find for me the lie comes wherever the enemy does not want me moving forward in confidence or being encouraged. Because he knows if I go that way and agree with the Father's view of me and presence in me, it will accomplish great things in the kingdom. So he goes, that's dangerous for the enemy. So he wants to come and pull that away from me. So, and I find that for everybody, where the Lord wants to move them and work through them, because we're vessels. The enemy doesn't want that. So he'll come to tear that down so that doesn't take place. Yeah. So I don't know if that answers a little bit of that question for you.
That even makes me think of Paul's stuff in 2 Corinthians 12, when I know the man who was caught up into the third heaven, whether in body or in spirit. And he goes on to say, then a messenger of Satan was given to me, a thorn in the flesh. And I sought God 3 times to remove the thorn in my flesh, and the Father finally cometh. I love that, the process, right? It's sometimes you think, I was chatting with someone about this the other day, you think that 3 times is like, he just said it 3 times in a row, right? So I just repeated it 3 times, and then God gave me an answer.
Yeah.
3 times, that means for some period of time, he was really seeking God. over this particular issue, whatever it was.
Mhm.
Lots of different ideas about the thorn in the flesh. But he gets this incredible revelation where the Father speaks to him and says, my power is made perfect in your weakness. My
Mhm.
sufficient for you. And Paul goes on and says, therefore, I'm going to glory in all the things that happened
Mm.
to me that would be a result of my weaknesses.
Mhm.
And so that sounds a lot like Paul's language, Steve, what you're saying. And one of the things I'm just thinking about, a statement you've made to me in our conversations, because there's a tendency, and I mean, this is a good tendency, to be transparent and honest and vulnerable as leaders, and talk about these things that we're struggling with. That Steve's overseeing 500-600 leaders and going, I feel inadequate, right?
Right.
And so, oh, okay, that makes me feel normal.
Yeah.
And there's a there's an element though where, and Steve, you can elaborate on this because we've talked about it, is ministering out of an open wound or a healed wound, and the difference between those two things. And I don't know if this is something you said or I've just envisioned it as you've talked about it, is when the open wound is there, you go, look how hurt I am and my blood's getting everywhere. But when the healing is there, the scar is there, but you can go to people, look at this wound, but this is how the Father healed it, and this is how he came alongside me, and this is how he spoke into that. And both of them can look transparent, but one of them doesn't actually do you any good. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to that, or Colin, if you have any thoughts you want to share.
I'd like to hear.
Yeah.
There's a huge element to that. There's a reality, it says in the scriptures that the natural gives insight into the invisible. That, so sometimes with boys, the trophies are the scars, never the wound, because the scar is a story.
Right.
And so when it's still a wound, there's no story. It's the middle of the story. And so sometimes the enemy will lie to us that the important part of the story is the wound, but it's not. It's rising from the wound and being healed from the wound. It's not the act of the wound. It's the healing and the recovery. That's the story. Because everybody needs a good ending to a story. They don't want to be left hanging. So I was stuck with the sword, or the stinging word of offense, or someone, brutalized me, in which are all valid and extremely important to recognize that. But that's just the middle of the story. And if you're left, it's like watching episodes, you're binge watching episodes of a story, and they haven't come, you've watched 7 episodes out of 8, but 8 hasn't been made yet, and everybody's left hanging. There's no satisfaction in the story that's hanging. And so to really minister out of a wound isn't really ministering. It's not a reality. It's there's a wound, and it's just the middle of the story. Let's just say I'm wounded. Okay, how do we walk into that? And then understanding too that you can't heal yourself. That's the glory of the story of Christ, is that he's the healer. Yeah. And it's a powerful thing. But again,
I'm just taking notes while you're talking.
That's where the lie comes in, where, what is it? 2 Corinthians 10 says, casting down imaginations, lies. So I say it this way sometimes: don't allow with the lie. How do I recognize the lie? First of all, does it sound anything like the Father? Well, how do I know what the Father sounds like if I don't spend time with the Father?
Right.
If I spend time in the Word, if I spend time in silence, if that was the Desert Fathers did, what they were fleeing into, but they actually were running into the arms of the Father, and they learned what the Father sounded like. They spent time and learned His voice. My sheep know my voice. They don't listen to the lie of the stranger. So all of those things in John are really important too, getting to know and spending time going, well, that doesn't really sound like the Father to me. Yeah. He doesn't want me comparing myself to others. So where's that thought, imagination coming from, that others are comparing them, thinking that I'm less than them? That's a lie from the enemy. And so, that's a powerful thing. And it says, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. So the knowledge of God, that the knowledge that God has about me, the enemy wants to tear down. And bringing into captivity every thought, the obedience of Christ, 2 Corinthians 10. Learning, again, realigning my heart to the truth that, my other two pillars. So the first pillar is don't believe the lie, and we've talked about that a little bit here today. The second one is don't get offended. The third one is remember the big picture. It's not about you. So when I embrace the lie, I guarantee you it will lead me to offense.
Right.
So if I minister out of a wound, then I'm really believing the lie that it's a wound and it's bad and they inflicted me, rather than, oh, where do I seek healing? Let's get healed and then tell the story. So, and then I get offended and I start pointing fingers, because the enemy just loves that, because he's the scandalizer, Satan, Lucifer, scandalizer, accuser of the brethren. He was offended at God because he couldn't be equal with God. So then he goes around to, and he's most positioned to help the people that are like him. He's going to have everybody get offended,
Right.
And Christ is most positioned to help the people that he once was. He walked in the flesh, suffered in the flesh, was crucified in the flesh, and rose in the flesh, which is our story. It's the redemptive story of our life in this realm, in the physical on the earth, until he returns, because we're eternal beings. And the enemy doesn't like that either. So, but then if I make it about me and not about Christ and not about the Father, so when the lie comes to me that I'm inadequate, what the lie really is my Father's inadequate.
Right.
And it goes back to, but if I make this about me, then I'm still in the picture. And Galatians 2 said, I was crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. Yet not I, but Christ lives in me. So now I'm this house, this vessel for the Father, for Christ and the Holy Spirit to live through me. They're actually me living through my flesh and blood, my existence. But if I make it about me, I'm going to be offended, and it reveals I've bought into the lie. If I buy into the lie, I'm going to get offended. I'm going to make it about me. So ministering out of your wound is making it about you. Ministering out of your scar and your story makes it about him. And that's a powerful thing. So,
Wow. Okay, I just need
Stop
to
saying
write
wow.
a couple more notes. That was ministering out of, I'm writing it down. Ministering out of your wound makes it about you. This means I'm more spiritual than you because I'm writing notes down.
It is. You are good. You are good. At that.
Colin might just have a memory that can just, he just captures everything. He doesn't need to write it down.
I wish.
I'm going with that story.
Yeah,
because,
sure. Thank you. Thanks, Dave. Yeah. But this has been, in many ways, actually, more helpful to me just in this moment than then I'll actually go on a podcast about, but more than we have time for it to explain. But yeah, just many of the things you've said, I think, and I hope for people watching too, it's been helpful in thinking about the ways that, that we have to be. I think we have to be cognizant of where things within us come from, and whether it's from that scar or that wound, and to remember that wound can turn into a scar. I think that's one of the greatest lies is sometimes that we can't be healed. That's what I often encounter in my own pastoral work with people is trying to remind them, that actually we do have a healer in this, great physician, and we can
And
put
he
our
didn't
hope in
come.
him.
He doesn't come for the perfect ones.
That's right.
Yeah. So he came for the ones that are sick that need healing.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing to recognize.
Absolutely.
Oh, actually, I have a wound, and like Steve had said, we need to walk through this and find that place of healing.
And this is, I want to just end on this because otherwise I won't have a car till tomorrow morning.
Yes, that is true. Yeah, we do have more episodes planned with Steve to go through, because I think these principles are just so important. yes, 2020 is crazy, and we haven't even talked about the election and what's going on down in the States, and it's crazy, but that is all the lie.
It is, and
Right.
and I've been. What I was going to say too is that I've been to just in supporting parishioners and friends. I've gone to AA meetings before, just when they're kind of having these moments of receiving a chip or something.
Mhm.
And I've been so moved when I've been there because it seems to me like, in many ways, that is sort of an image of what, at its best, the church should be like, where you have these people that are being, in this very raw way, honest about their wound,
Right.
right? And it's like, this is where I am weak. And then you have the people around being like, yeah, this is where we're weak too. But then it's all kind of directed towards this greater hope of like, how does this turn into a scar and how do we
Right.
get out of it? And I'm like, I'm always kind of leaving them, a few times I've gone, going like, wow, how do I carry this back into it? Like, we need just like a 12-step for sinners kind of thing
Right.
in church, right? But really, it's a moving and powerful thing, and I think we have to, as a church, as church communities, as
Right.
the pews with each other, remember that it's a cliched thing, but these places that we come to, and our relationship with God is more like a hospital for those wounds than it is
Yeah.
a sanctuary for those who are already healed or something like that.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
little-
Absolutely.
Just can I just add one thing in that? If it's not hopeful, it's not helpful, and it reveals the lie. So people go to hospitals because they hope to be healed. People come to churches, they hope to find God.
Yeah.
And that's a glorious place to be. And I think you're right on with that, Colin.
Yeah.
So the lie is, if it's not hopeful, it's the presence of a lie is there.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's that's
thanks, guys.
Yeah,
Thank you so
Steve.
much. Yeah.
thank
Thanks,
you
Steve,
so
for
much.
coming. And like I said, we're going to have more episodes going through these principles. We just think, I think they're super important.
Absolutely.
And I think Colin will be on board with me.
I love Anglicans.
Yes. Yes. And so again, thanks so much for coming on, Steve. And we'll be back next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.